Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Practice Makes Perfect discussion series in partnership with the Canadian Society of Industrial and Organizational Psychologists, or CSIOP. I'm your host, Michael Vodianoy, and in this series, I speak with experts in our field that are talking about topics that face leaders and organizations every day to help us better serve the companies that we support. So it's hard to think of anyone for whom today's topic isn't relevant and maybe urgently relevant. And that is the topic of how generative AI is impacting how we as individuals operate in organizations and how organizations operate and structure themselves collectively, and how we anticipate and plan for the future of talent and the workforce. And so joining us today to talk about how she and her organization are preparing the workforce for the age of AI is Tanya Zarina, Director of Workforce Transformation and Leadership at one of our major Canadian financial institutions. Tanya, we are very excited to have you on the discussion.
Thanks, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So a little more introduction. So Tanya has a master's in industrial organizational psychology from the University of Waterloo. She's been a practitioner for going on about 10 years, working in various roles across some of Canada's biggest financial institutions, as well as a human capital consultant at one of our major consulting organizations as well.
We're being extremely vague.
Yeah, check out Tanya's LinkedIn page for more specific details. But more specifically, for the last several years, you've been focused on broadly the future of work and understanding and assessing how the workforce is being reshaped based on some of these trends and new technologies that are emerging. And this has led you to dive deeply into generative AI, and you're spending a lot of your time thinking, researching, and analyzing how these technologies impact employees, leaders, and organizations. And so I'm excited to get into that in more detail. I want to note that this is a pre-recorded discussion, though we are airing it live on LinkedIn, and Tanya and I are present as it's being aired. So if you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll respond to that as they emerge. So with that, we'll get into the discussion. And Tanya, I wanted to start off with maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your journey and the types of questions you try to answer and the challenges that you help solve in organizations.
Sure. So, like you said, I've been thinking about future of work for a number of years. And that was always kind of, how is the world changing and what does that mean for our employees and leaders in terms of the skills, the roles that are coming in, helping the organization be more future focused. So, not only thinking a year out, but really thinking 3 to 5, possibly even longer. So it always kind of was, macro trends and then whatever the business strategy of the organization was. And then came along Gen AI, and kind of it became this, topic du jour. Everybody was talking about it. I'm a bit of a skeptic, so at first I was like, "Oh, is this?" We've heard it all. The digital transformation, data-driven organizations, kind of all the hype that has always been around. I think there's always something new coming out that all the consulting firms want to sell, or all the technology firms want their clients to buy. So it was a little bit skeptical. But then I think once I started researching and understanding and talking to people and actually using generative AI myself, I think the first time I used ChatGPT, I was like, oh my God, this is actually, like, it is transformational, and it will actually have a huge impact on almost every role within the organization. So I think that's kind of I think like AI has been around for forever. For the last 30 years, there's been progressive development. I get to watch my favorite Netflix shows because there's an algorithm that's feeding it. We're all used to kind of AI being in the background and making our lives better, the processes better. But I think generative AI is so special because it's really come to the forefront, and it's so available to everyone. And what I mean by that is because of how easy it is to use it, it really lowers the barrier to entrance. So every employee, no matter the age, capability, will be able to put a question into ChatGPT and get an answer. So I think we've talked about kind of democratizing tools, democratizing data. I think this is the first time I've actually seen a tool that's going to democratize a very, a very huge productivity boost for a lot of employees. So that's kind of the the long story of how it started. But then I think once we got really like into looking at what are the capabilities, and I feel like generative AI is just at the beginning of the evolution. And so once you understand that this is just the beginning and it's only going to, progress so fast, then you really like you see the unlock and you see that organizations have to really understand what it is and begin exploring it and begin preparing their employees for it, because there's no hiding from it. It's so easy to use that employees are using it at home anyway. So of course they're going to bring the same expectations to work. So I think that's been the transformation aspect of it.
Yeah, I remember the first time I tried it out, and I think we all collectively had this moment of like, whoa, like, and like you said, it's been around a while. But this was that first, and I remember a lot of people reacting to this like, no, this isn't new. This has kind of been around. It's like, no, this feels different. This is something that we haven't felt and experienced before. So I think we all had that moment of like, this is new. And then the second moment is, how can I, like, what in my life can I start using this on?
No, I think it's so funny. I think the most kind of the usual example people have is like anybody who's done trip planning. Like I love trip planning, right? It's like
I
so
hate
I'm
it.
one of those weird people. Exactly, my husband hates it, but once you realize that you can use ChatGPT to plan your itinerary and then use it as like a conversational tool, basically to like pinpoint new locations and like plan your whole trip around it, you're like, oh my god, this is so cool, right? So I think that's kind of like, I don't know, if somebody hasn't used it yet, if you have a if you have a trip coming up, really useful use case.
Yeah, I used it for that purpose. And I feel like using it for things that I'm not good at or don't have skill in has been super helpful. Where like, I'm a good writer, and I've tried not to use it for things that I'm good at, or but like trip planning. The other night, me and my kids, we watch Is It Cake, that show on Netflix where you have to see what, and we all try to guess what's cake. And so I had ChatGPT like code a game to help us organize. Like I've never coded before. Like it didn't turn out so well, but like you could just kind of make things happen. It, like you said, sort of democratizes what the ordinary person can create.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of like the one of the biggest things is it like it levels the playing field for a lot of roles, right? Or like individuals. So I feel like you said you're really good at writing, but somebody who's not that good at writing, this tool can really help them create good first drafts and really hone their skills. So I think that's the really cool part for employees and organizations, is that you can like really upskill and onboard your employees to jobs much faster, right? By giving them this tool to help them. So I think there's a lot of like also doom and gloom around there, like the robots are coming for jobs, humans are going to be replaceable. My conclusion kind of after being in this world for a little while is actually like I feel like it's the opposite. I think this is so exciting. I think it's going to really exponentially help humans to really do the things that I think we all really love, like to be more creative and to be more productive and just focus on the right tasks. So I see it as more of an exponential technology rather than something that's gonna, have a negative impact.
Yeah. Well, I think the positive and negatives of a big change sometimes take a long time to trickle down, but um, change is scary. It's a big unknown. There's
Yes.
so much, built into how we think about robots and technology that I think colors our perception of the future. But I'm curious, now, like you said, you've been in it for a while and you've formed a perspective on where it's at, and at least in the near to midterm, where it might be going. Like, what are some things that you feel now are clearer to you than when you started, as it relates to the impact that's going
Yeah,
to have?
so I think the really interesting part is that I think it's the first time in history that, automation. We always think about automation. It's going to be manual labor, repetitive tasks. That was kind of the mindset all along. And then comes this technology, and we're like, oh, this is the first time knowledge workers, so me and you, are actually going to have our roles augmented. I think augmentation is such a nice term because that's exactly what's going to happen. I think to most roles, they're just going to change and augment. So yeah, I think it's, I grew up in the world of, everybody should learn to code, right? Like like it was such a hot skill, when I was thinking like, what am I going to tell my daughter to do? And like, what activity am I going to put her in? It was always like, oh, coding and stuff. But I think now, like, we actually have a technology that can code, um, sometimes better than humans, or it changes the job of a software engineer, and it takes a lot of the actual coding over. So I think it's just a really neat technology that's gonna, it's gonna impact everyone. So we have to think more like broadly than just thinking about the maybe it's the jobs in the back office or the front office. No, this is literally going to augment everybody's reality.
Yeah, and I think there are organic ways that people are picking up capabilities by testing and prompting and experimenting. But you mentioned also building capabilities and knowledge around generative AI internally. Is that something that you're involved with, or is your focus generally sort of more broad in terms of its impact and workforce and strategic planning?
Yeah, so I think it's both because they're kind of interlinked. So you kind of have to look at what is actually going to happen to the organization, what roles are going to augment, what roles are going to shift, how that's going to happen, what does that look like? And then you have to marry that with, okay, but what does that mean from a perspective of, upskilling and reskilling? Because I think, that we've heard the term, we have to become a learning organization. I think lots of IO psych grads are kind of in that space. We've heard that a lot for a long time. But I think this technology makes it just an imperative for every organization. So I think the upskilling and reskilling angle will just become a part of the DNA of organizations that thrive in this environment, because this technology is moving so fast that you're going to have to constantly upskill your employees. And then also because of the changes with in general automation, you're also going to have to reskill some into new jobs that either you have needs for, or that are just coming about and have never been, we've never had a prompt engineer before. Organizations are taking their data scientists and teaching them these skills that are super new, and then they're becoming prompt engineers. So I think the organizations that will weave the upskilling and reskilling in a new way into their DNA are the ones that are really going to take advantage of this and succeed.
Yeah, yeah, no, I completely agree. And you touched on the impact that it's having on democratizing skills and capabilities, and on augmenting and speeding up, efficiency on some technical or repetitive things. But from your perspective, right, looking at a financial services organization like you do, and how do you evaluate that systematically to help with workforce planning?
Yeah, so I think once this came about, I come from a world, I did org design and org efficiency back in my consulting days. So I'm used to, roles and structures and like perfect neat boxes. And then once this came around, we realized that you really have to break a job down into much smaller kind of particles in order to understand where the human plays best versus the technology. So it's not really about jobs anymore. It's about tasks, and which tasks is the human better suited for versus what tasks the new technology, call it the co-pilot or whatever it becomes, can actually do in a much more faster, efficient way. So really it's that like mindset moving away from, that's why I talk about augmentation a lot. So it's going to augment the role based on the tasks they're going to be done by the human versus the machine. And it's really the first time that the humans will be working alongside the machines together. And so this perspective of looking at tasks really helps you understand how the role evolves.
So as you've looked across,
Mhm.
different types of roles and all sorts of the tasks, that they're responsible for, what are some of the big shifts from a task perspective, but also, when you think about the implications for how you hire, when you need to hire, what you're hiring for, what you are prioritizing in that process, and what you then
Mhm.
choose to focus on for development, like what are the tasks being, impacted, and then what are the big shifts that you would project from a talent, selection and development perspective that you're thinking about?
Yeah, so I think that the really neat thing that comes out across the research is really that the human skills come to the forefront. So everything us IO psychologists, live and breathe. So it's like everything we know how to, assess in leaders and employees. That really comes to the forefront because it's going to be the people who are able to adapt to change, deal with ambiguity, learn really fast, fail really fast. And then I think the key one is like be curious. So I think the curiosity becomes a really like that will have the longevity for employees. If you have a curious employee who's always willing to learn, and kind of augment what they're doing with the best technology out there, then that's the employee that's gonna, have a thriving career. So I think it's a really good message because I think those things we know are, we can teach them and we can practice them and we can set up our organizations in a way that allows employees to really build and hone those skills. So I think for me, they're kind of like the no regret moves that organizations have to really invest in. I think organizations in the past have really shied away from, the kind of softer human skills. It's always been, yes, we know it's important, but like they can do that later. And now I think that we're seeing like the technical skills just evolve so fast, and a lot of them will probably be done by some sort of technology in 5-10 years. So what are those skills that will be forever eternal and useful to employees? And it's really those human skills.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. When I think about the implications of that nowadays, right, as we consider ourselves in our professional domain, and then we're going into companies, and there are job titles or professions within organizations that people stream towards. Do you, given that there might be, and we sort those really by technical capabilities more than curiosity and
Mm.
comfort and ambiguity, those are broader and they really apply across. Do you think that there is less utility in fine distinctions between types of roles, and maybe a bit of a breakdown in how we think about the ways that we operate? Like, how do we define that if the things that are becoming more emergent and important are just kind of broad human capabilities?
Yeah, I think it's gonna like technical skills are never gonna go away. You will forever, need people who understand the business, the customer. I don't know, have, like good developers who actually understand how to build these models that power generative AI. But it's just really that fact that they're going to change. They're going to augment at a faster rate than we've ever seen. So I think it's just setting up your employees to be able to, kind of have a broader perspective on the things that they will be able to do within the organization. I also feel like it's the first time, like the agile transformation, the digital transformation, they were really powerful drivers for a lot of organizations. But I think a lot of organizations have really had a hard time harnessing the benefits of it, right? Like they're it's very difficult because it's really a mindset shift a lot. I always talk about, what differentiates like agile versus waterfall. And it's really comes down to, once again, it's the human behaviors, right? It's like it's leaders that let go of control and have empowered teams. It's employees that take ownership and are creative and are not afraid to fail. So I think this is like the next iteration of these. This is going to drive these behaviors more and more. And yeah, like the leaders who can adapt are it's just going to be that much more visible.
Yeah, I love that in these types of conversations, the theme that seems to come out, the more people I talk to about it, is that the more we augment and say, well, what, like you said, what serves better with AI and versus what do we need to be doing as people, I get the sense that we're going to learn a lot about what makes us human, and what we didn't need to really be doing, and what wasn't
I
really
think so too.
meaningful to us, but we just didn't have a better way.
And I think that's such a good point because once again, I come from a consulting background. I love creating, I love pretty decks. I think that's one of the biggest skills you learn, if somebody didn't know. But I mean, I also, I would love for a technology to take the first stab at the deck. And then I use my critical thinking, creativity, context, business understanding to really tweak that. How much time would that save me in order for me to be, like connecting with employees, understanding business needs, doing much more valuable, creating creative and meaningful tasks. So I think that's the mindset shift. Like we all want our work to be meaningful. And if you have a tool or a co-pilot or whatever it is to help you really kind of make your work more efficient, that's amazing, right? That's why I think it's like it's scary, but it's also super exciting.
Yeah, I think on an individual level, your ability to be effective in augmenting what you're doing, like you said, like you can, and maybe you still enjoy making decks that reflect your own personal style, but if it might have taken you an hour before, maybe it only takes you 10 minutes.
Exactly. And that I think like a really good example, I think for a lot of IO psychologists go into learning and development. That's an industry I think is like ripe for revolution because if you think about what generative AI does and the fact that it can create new content, so it actually can create first drafts of courses of whatever you need, and how much time is spent on like the actual production is by learning teams a lot. So then now you have all this freed up capacity and like all the things you can do with it. You can go lower in the organization, right? You can do like fancy learning programs, not only for the top of the house, but you can, actually capture the whole organization and make change for frontline employees. You can, the upskilling, reskilling program. So you can really turn that learning and development to the next phase and actually help somebody learn something that can put them in a new job. You can tailor the programs like so much more, right? It's like we don't need cookie cutter programs anymore because you have all this free capacity to really like drill down and understand employee needs better. So I think it's expansive, right? I think it's the mindset. I think sometimes is when you hear generative AI, it's like, oh, okay, there's going to be cost savings and efficiencies. And I think what we need to really push from an HR people perspective is like, no, let's look at the other side. Let's look at the amount of productivity and creativity that can be unlocked and how we can use that in our organizations to really, drive revenue, drive sales, drive creativity, drive new product development. There's always a backlog. There's always more work to do. So I feel like this gives you that lift to actually address all the things that you've always wanted to do with your team.
Yeah, I love that example because I think it highlights again like something that I don't know, maybe people's because of their educational background or their own professional egos, but things that they take a lot of pride in, but the focus of a development program augmented by AI puts you in a position to be more strategic, more thoughtful. How do I make this stick? How do I make this meaningful to the people that I'm presenting it to in a way that I can as a professional, as an expert, as a human being? And yeah, you're getting 50, 40% of the way, or whatever it is, that AI is helping you along with. But it's, and then I think when I think individually about, again, what we choose to give over to AI, like I don't know, I like writing birthday cards and like personal messages. And I feel like it's very important when I do that, that it's from me and that it has like my personal flavor embedded in it. And so I wouldn't give that, my writing and my voice, like I wouldn't pass that on to AI. And I just, because I worry that
It's
almost
the
like,
personal touch. It's what you want to feel like you.
well, it's the personal touch, but it's also like when I think about spell check in Microsoft Word, the moment is like, so why did I spend all that time learning how to spell? Like And then you kind of get worse at it because you don't have to check yourself all the time. And I almost worry that like the things that we give over 5 years down the road, you can't take back so easily, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that too. And I think that with like, I think like the education system comes to mind. So I get worried. I'm like, oh, like, are my kids even going to have to write essays, or, like they're probably going to use some new generative AI tool to, process that. But I think that's where the education piece comes. It's like, when do we use generative AI to help us? And then how do we become even better at critical thinking? How do we make those first drafts? That much better with our understanding of the business, with our understanding of the problem, with our creativity, with pulling in all the other knowledge. So that's where I think we just really need to educate people how and when to best use it. And I think for now, it's super obvious. Like, if you think about, I don't know, like a resume that's been written by generative AI, it's pretty easy for a human to tell that it's
For now.
very generic, right? But I think a person who is writing a resume can do a first draft with generative AI, saving themselves hours, then can take their personal knowledge, understanding of the job they're applying for, understanding of their skill set, how to sell them, how to brand themselves, and make that into a really good second copy. And then, how much more ahead are you of the competition who's not using generative AI? Same for like job descriptions. If you think of a recruiter, if a recruiter starts from zero, it's going to take them hours to develop this job description. Okay. Or they can use a generative AI tool to, scrape the data and pull in the other job descriptions that are out there, create a first draft. Then the recruiter takes a lens of their organization, what the leader is looking for, what the hiring manager is looking for, and really can create a much better document. So I think it's really kind of, it's the evolution and the understanding of where you can use it effectively, but then what do you need to do on top of it with your human skill set?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of this, when you think about planning and projecting into the future, the murky future that we don't have visibility into, how 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 big of a time horizon is reasonable? Like when we say, this is gonna, some of the assumptions that you've shared, right? How far into the future can you say those with confidence?
So I think for now it's like 1 or 2 years, just because the technology is moving so fast. I don't know if nobody's seen, like, they can see what OpenAI puts, like, if you've heard of Sora, they're like the video generating program. If you haven't seen the Balloon Man, watch it. It'll kind of blow your mind. So I think just in the last few months, the advancements have become so fast. So I think it's smart to think about it 1, 2 years out. But I think because of the regulatory constraints on organizations, and of the risk factors, and of the fact that it's so new, organizations will take longer to adopt. So even though your view is 1, 2 years, it's actually going to be 3 to 5 for organizations once they have to develop their use cases, develop how, like, their risk framework for how they're going to use generative AI, really like pilot use cases. It's going to take a little while for it to actually get to like the productivity boost, the transformative nature of it.
So when you think about, and obviously you're in a very large financial institution, um, contrast that with a smaller fintech organization that doesn't, one, like their time horizon, or the pace that they can adopt some change like that is much shorter. How do you like balance those tensions, the tension of need for speed of change, concern with, with risk and uncertainty, in a large organization like you're in?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big aha, right? That's the hard part of it because, for example, the industries that everybody's saying are going to be the most disrupted are financial services, legal services. You can't think of kind of more bureaucratic, regulated, risk averse industries that are, because they have to be, right? Like, we handle really sensitive information. There's lots of customers who depend on the services. So I think it's the balance of um, understanding the risks, but then within these organizations there's always pockets, and like they're usually called sandbox pockets. So there's little spots where it's safe to experiment. So I think it's about organizations finding those little pockets, identifying the use cases, and then really letting employees experiment. And then I think the more I've read about, the success stories, I think it's really cross-functional teams that are identifying these use cases and experimenting with these new tools, because I think a technology expert with a human resources expert plus a legal expert and somebody from the business, they can bring all those perspectives together, and it's kind of like a healthy tension of, where are the risks versus where is that experimentation happening. So I think those cross-functional teams that are experimenting together is what's going to yield really the unlock for organizations. And I think it's like, I think that's why it's so exciting to be in HR right now, because I think we really bring that human lens to this. So the technology, the people who are, the tech experts, they're going to think about, efficiency and cost savings and how this is going to automate processes. And I think we can say, okay, but what does that mean from a role perspective? What does that mean from the employee perspective? What kind of leader does a team who's using this technology now need? And I think that's I think it's a really powerful moment for HR to, come to the table and not be afraid of this, but actually embrace it and be that advocate for the employee and how this can be a really incredible game changer for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been interesting to see how a lot of the energy behind the technological transformation around AI has lived within HR, learning and development, and in partnership with other parts of the organization as well. And I remember when I started playing around with it, and I kept messaging like the IT people, and be like, "Have you seen this?" Or like the R&D team, like, "Are we thinking about this?" And I don't know, like it felt like there was so much energy around it, but having pockets to, like you said, capture, I guess, some of that energy, experiment
And
safely.
safely explore, because I think that's like it's so new, and like there's so much out there, right? There's so many avenues to do it. You can go to vendors who are selling different Gen AI products. You can do pilots with existing technology. You can do your own large language models that can be for a certain use case or group. So there's so many avenues to test it, and I think until organizations get really comfortable exploring this and testing it, and really not like testing the art of the possible with it, they won't be able to harness the lift and the productivity and the creativity that can come out of it. But that's the big, that's the tension. I think a lot of organizations are nervous, and it makes sense. It's new and there's lots of risk. Like I think it was Air Canada just got sued for something their chatbot said. So I mean, the risks are real. I don't want to paint this rosy picture of, everything is perfect. I mean, Gemini just got recalled from
Yeah.
the Google tool, right, over vectored on diversity a bit. So I think it's just it's still evolving. There's dangers that I think lots of organizations, especially large, regulated, well-established brands, don't really want to expose themselves to. But I think that's why it's so important to find those pockets and those people. Like I think it's also, this can be so exciting for so many people to really, use. So I think it's really identifying the people who are going to push the thinking and help the change management along the way. That's so important.
Yeah, I love the importance of having cross-functional units that are collaborating on this in real time, especially where somebody's got energy around ideas and an understanding of implications for business, and then impact on customers, impact on partners, legal concerns. I think having the infrastructure around that touches on the point around influencing large scale change that everybody's going to need to go through, and how you move through it, and the speed that you move through it, and the conscientiousness that you take in that process is going to make a big difference a few years down the road. And I think that's a great bit of advice for somebody who's thinking about within our organization, how should we be touching and engaging with this constructively? So those pockets, I think is a good suggestion.
Yeah, I think that's how a lot of companies have been, approaching this. I think there's a broader governance body that usually gets created that sets, the parameters and the risk and kind of the risk guidelines, which are so important. Like we don't want, data getting out into the open and the machine learning on something we don't want. But I think it's just, yeah, it's like how do we balance the safety of it with the experimentation and creativity and really allowing people to play with it and get excited about the possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've talked a lot about the hands-on experimentation, personal experience that you've had, and everybody really has had with the generative AI, and then extrapolating a bit from that into, okay, well, this thing that we're playing with and that we're trying out, here's ways that we think it might influence, things down the road from a talent planning perspective. But for somebody who is, dedicated to understanding the implications of this, I'm curious what other ways beyond getting in there and playing with it, like how else are you gathering information to inform what you're thinking about?
Yeah, so I feel like I always put my nerd hat back on and feel like I'm a little back in university. So I think there's just lots of really great resources. I mean, MIT, like all the top universities, actually Waterloo and U of T are all putting out great research. I think the big consulting firms are also doing an amazing job. The McKinsey's, BCG, and Deloitte, they have their research arms and they're really driving a lot of the thought leadership. I think it's, putting those together. And then also, I think there's a kind of like a grassroots movement of people who are just super curious and are super, nerds and like want to test this technology. So I found a lot of really great content on, open platforms that really shows you, you can think about this theoretically, but then there's, a person who's showing you how to build a visual from your Excel without ever having to do data analysis, right? So it's like I think it's really that grassroots movement that makes it real. Because I think once you understand, oh, okay, like this can save me hours doing Excel formulas and can actually generate something useful. It makes it really, really it makes it real, right? You can start understanding how this works. So I think I think I would suggest everybody, goes and finds some good thinkers, but some thinkers that are like a bit outside the box too.
Yeah, and I think we talked a bit about the doom and gloom of, and I've heard some very smart people say some things that sound really like apocalyptic, and only because of, like I know that they take this seriously, like but coming from somebody else, it would sound, okay, again, it's a little doom and gloom, but getting clearer on what this actually is, how it functions, what its capabilities and limits are, and how you actually work with it, I think can dispel some of the fear.
Exactly. You can dispel a lot of the myths. And then you think about it. I was just watching a podcast with Josh Berzin, who I think is such a good HR thinker. But yeah, like the way he describes it, it's like it's another tool, but it's like, the way we're so used to using Google. Like this is kind of the next iteration of it. So I think if you imagine, I think Microsoft is a genius for calling it a co-pilot because I think that's the way I picture this. So if you imagine that every employee has this like co-pilot that's helping them, generate ideas, analyze data, answer questions, sort through a bunch of information, and they have it to help them be better at their job, be more productive. Like that makes it real, right? So it's just a very um, amazing tool that I think will soon come to a lot of different areas. But it's not going to replace the human, it's just going to work alongside it, just like any other tool. But if you want to get like slightly scared, I mean, the CEO of NVIDIA has some awesome clips of how, software will be written in the future and how it's going to be like chatbots operated by like a super AI. I mean, he says 10 years down the road. I don't know, but he's been very like I think those thinkers are really really interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it's not hard to slip into that way of thinking. Also, again, we're talking like a 1 to 2 year time horizon, and we're working with just what we're seeing, right? Like what we're experiencing, the pace that we've seen. But in the, in the expanse of our human history, 10 years is nothing. But it
Exactly.
feels like a very distant future just for how fast we're moving. And who knows, what about
Exactly.
15 years?
I just feel like, I don't know, I'm on the optimist side. I guess maybe it's a personality thing or an outlook thing, but I feel like I learned recently about like Luddites in the 19th century who were, like against innovation and manufacturing. So I feel like that type of thinking of, humans will forever be replaced by machines has always been there. But I think history has proven that we're actually quite adaptive, creative, and we get around to it and create new industries, new jobs, new skills, um, and really take advantage of technology. Like, even if you think about the NVIDIA example, which is like so far out there, well, somebody's going to have to program this AI. Somebody's going to constantly have to update the model that's driving it. Somebody's going to have to, teach it all the time. Somebody's going to have to check what it's doing. Because I think that's the big aha, is that humans are still going to really need to understand what's happening, because they're going to be the ones checking the work of the machines, right? So even if the machine is delivering code, we know that these models tend to hallucinate. They tend to express our biases. So I think that like humans will still need to really understand what happens in the process and really have even more critical thinking and be very good at identifying where the mistakes or the hallucinations are happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, holding on to the responsibility of catching AI doing that and not relying on AI to catch AI hallucinating.
Exactly. And that's what I think I think we have to educate individuals and employees working with us and leaders of how to, like how to have those skills, how to spot the mistakes, even like more than we've ever had to do. So I think it's just it's like a new capability that we have to build as humans to be way more critical and not take the product at face value.
Yeah, absolutely. As an organizational psychologist doing this sort of work and working with other folks who probably come from different backgrounds and have different perspectives, I'm picturing myself and the people who might be listening to this as people with a similar background in their organization who may be at one stage or another in this process of experimentation, building capabilities and understanding, and pushing change forward on those in their
Mhm.
organizations. What do you see as uh, like a differentiated role for somebody with our educational background and orientation within
Hmm.
this technological
So I
change?
think kind of out of the HR suite of skills and employees, I think IOs always come in with, being the more data savvy individuals. In a lot of cases, we like data. We like to, we had to do lots of analysis to get our degrees, and we're not afraid of it compared to, I mean, some other backgrounds. So I think actually the individuals who want to work in that space, they can actually be the ones, also building the models for HR and building these tools, like to be part of the process with the tech teams. So I think that's a really neat opportunity. And then I think kind of as people who are, very passionate about leadership and change management and understanding employees, I think IO psychologists are so critical to, in the change management journey, to bring employees along with us, and not have them scared of this new technology, but to really kind of garner that excitement and possibility. I think we're the ones who understand, the theories that can help. So I think bringing that perspective forward can be a really, really important. And then I also think we're just like, a lot of us are really curious people, right? Like the curiosity, I call it the nerdiness. I think is just so valuable. Like it's the people who want to learn about this and really push the thinking of HR teams, because I think a lot of the time, HR is focused on, policies and procedures and things that they have to worry about. And then we can really be those more innovative, forward thinking individuals who are pushing the thinking.
Yeah, I feel like there's your optimism is showing through there a little bit also because you're right. I think the people from organizational psychologists that I have worked with and been around to some degree bring, like you said, an orientation to data and analytics, an understanding of organizational process, and can have input from an innovative perspective. But something you touched on earlier also almost feels more natural to the personality subset, which is being being a fact checker, more on the risk side as well. But
Rigorous, risk-based, yeah, that can be a profile,
that's
very
like
needed.
I worked in assessment, right? And it's not hard really to come up with an assessment of somebody's capabilities or personality or whatever it is. But what is hard is to figure out, is this working? Like, is it good? Does it do what you say it does? And bringing that perspective, that skepticism, the desire and willingness to get in and say, is this real? And how do we evaluate how well AI can detect job fit or gauge somebody's interview. So somebody else might look at it and say, well, it gave me a score for these interviews, and I'm going to make a decision based on it. And somebody else might say, well, how do we know that score isn't biased and isn't picking up things it shouldn't be picking up? And I think there's value on probably both sides of the innovation spectrum.
See, that's why you need cross-functional teams with diversity of thought. I think that's where this is so interesting and has the power to really change work and organizations, is when different types of thinking come together.
Absolutely. So I'm just, as we're kind of nearing the end of our discussion, when you think about leaders who are thinking about generative AI, people in HR, organizational psychologists, from the perspectives that you've garnered and generated in your work, I'm curious if there's anything that you would want to leave people with to think about, something that you can leave people to take away from the discussion.
Yeah, I think I think as a whole, HR is really evolving. I speak of HR broadly. Most of us work either in consulting or HR, but I think the field overall is evolving, and we're just. I think the interconnection between tech and HR has never been as needed, and I think a lot of us grow up in this silo of where that people support function, and we sometimes don't really even talk to tech. But I think the interconnection is just becoming so vital. So I think just like developing an understanding, a curiosity, that willingness to experiment with new technology is really, really important, because if you think about it, the employee experience, it's largely driven by technology now. So I really see like the forefront thinkers in HR really embracing that and bringing the two worlds together and being able to talk to the tech leaders in our organizations, and really partner much more closely than I think they ever have. So I think I think it's a really exciting time to be in HR. Like, I think we can really push the thinking, and be at the table driving some of these really, really important topics.
Thank you. I think so too. And again, thank you for your optimism. Thank you for bringing your perspective. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Awesome.
How can people connect with you? Is LinkedIn the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, sure. Reach out on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat and connect.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Tanya, so much. Again, connect with Tanya on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn to stay up to date for future conversations. And I also recommend following CSIOP, the Canadian Society of Industrial Organizational Psychologists, on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much for
Thanks,
joining.
Michael. You're doing such an awesome job. I think this is so innovative. I think this is so cool. So keep it up.
I appreciate you calling my podcast innovative, but
I think so.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right.
Okay, bye.
Bye.